how can we inspire students to progress to a higher reading level? What are effective ways to evaluate an adolescent's reading ability? How can we strengthen the importance of reading within and beyond the school library?
Our next session will feature Angela Erickson, who serves as the head of libraries at UWCSEA Dover in Singapore, and previously held the role of head of middle school English.
We invite you to the stage.
Before I start, I want to just express my gratitude for being here. It's been such a good experience, and I think that this community has grown such a wonderful reading community, so it's been wonderful to observe. And then I also have two confessions before I get going. One, I'm only speaking from my experience as a teacher and a librarian, and so a lot of the examples that I use might be applicable to other contexts, but they also might not. And then sitting through Katie and Nadine's session, they did such a beautiful job of citing their sources, and honestly, I've been teaching middle school English for so long that a lot of where I got ideas, I didn't cite very well. So I will share my email at the end, and if you want any of my resources and I can tell you where they came from, I'm happy to share. Okay, so like the lovely students who introduced me said, I'm head of libraries right now, but I've been in the classroom for a long time. I taught community college and then high school English, and then I was head of middle school at United World College for a long time. And when I started at UWC, my students were reading 4 books a year. So they were reading a collection of poetry, and then they were reading 1 novel, and then they were reading 1 Shakespeare play, and then they were reading 1 free choice book. And so I was talking to my team about, well, what do we know about their reading lives? And really that was left to at home or their independent reading when they would go to the library. And so I was like, no, we've got to change this. And so we were just thinking, what's a good number? And one of my colleagues said, oh, they should be reading 10 times as much. And so we just set the arbitrary goal that they're going to read 40 books over the year. Okay, so that's a lot. It's a lot of reading. And so that's a whole nother presentation. But I want you to keep in mind that was our goal. And this is basically how we work towards it. So, but this is a really interesting thing to consider, is that we live in a time where more people on the world than ever before can read and write. Literacy rates are high, but then we have this erosion of deep reading, and that threatens a lot of things. It threatens critical thinking. On some level, it threatens democracy. So how are we changing this? And also, in order to change it, we have to figure out what the root cause is. And so in education, these are the things that are coming up. So phones, social media, this amazing amount of anxiety that teens are facing. A lot of that anxiety is coming from unprecedented academic pressure. And then also, there's all this wonderful research about friendships, but friendships are complicated, and they're especially complicated because of social media. And so I think academic pressure is complicated because of social media as well. I keep going backwards. I'm not going to go backwards. So in design thinking, this is called a wicked problem. So this idea of a Gordian knot, where if you take away their phones, then you increase isolation. And if you don't pay attention to academic pressure, then you risk your children's future, right, which is super stressful. So, and then also the National Council of Teachers of English, they in 2022, they decided to decenter the reading of novels, and they shifted a lot of curriculums to focusing on media texts and analyzing video, because those were the media, that's considered the media of the future, which is super interesting. Okay, and so then in order to solve this problem, I think that we can only look at the roles that we already have in place, right? And so today I want to look at the role of parents, teachers, and school librarians. And I think we all have the same common goal, which is growing readers. But then we all have kind of different agendas, right? Like librarians, we want to ensure access. that there's representation, variety, and freedom of choice in reading. And then teachers, they have an obligation to promote the books that support or are required by the curriculum. And then parents, and I think that I think it's true that there's immense knowledge capital or knowledge currency that comes from reading the classics, and so parents are pushing an agenda in that direction. And so then, even though we're all trying to grow readers, we also have these unwritten promises to each other, right? Where, and this is complicated. I think school librarians especially have this obligation to parents where we're making sure the content is age appropriate and aligns with family values, which is hard in like increasingly multicultural schools where family values shift and are different, and so you can't really, it's a complicated dynamic. And then parents and teachers, their linked expectation around reading is that there's academic rigor and the skills are progressing and they're linked to standards and exams because those are high stakes and they matter. And then teachers expect from librarians that there's going to be content that supports the curriculum. But this is where it gets so messy. So what happens is parents end up paying tutors, and then there's all this pressure to succeed, which is expected. And then teachers overteach a single text because they have to, because it's high stakes. And so then they're teaching the text and not necessarily the reader. And then there's this increase in workload, which is also, I don't even know if there's an increase in workload, but there's an increase in time spent on devices, so then it kind of pressurizes time regardless. And then I think school librarians do weird things then. They either hide behind their desks and then they get fired, right? Or they get eliminated. In America, there's school library jobs are disappearing because they're not seen as essential. Or, and I know I'm guilty of this, creating programs that compete with academics, where it's like, here's another book to read, and here's a book club, and here's this fun thing, and then that just complicates the work for students. I want to talk about the over-tutoring, because in middle school especially, and that's where I'm coming from, is what I noticed, and this is like more than 10 years of practice, that too much tutoring sends the message to kids that they can't learn what they need to know from the text on their own, and that without someone telling them the deeper meaning, they can't unlock it themselves. And so as a reader, that cuts a lot of self-efficacy, and it creates this learned helplessness where kids want to receive information about a book, not do the work of uncovering meaning and looking for patterns. And so it's really, I find that really problematic, because trying to unpack that with students is really challenging. But I understand the reason why. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about really quickly is I think in primary school, parents can share the books that they loved when they were young, and they can read them together. But then in secondary, it shifts in a really interesting way, where I had one student, like I taught middle school for a long time, and then last year I took a high school class. For the past couple of years, I've taken a high school class. And I had a student, now I really want my students to read 40 books a year, right? Like this is still my aim in high school. And so I had a student who, his dad's favorite book was Shogun, and he could not get into Shogun. He spent 7 months trying to get into Shogun. That kid could have read 20 books in that time. But he really, and he didn't want to give up on it, and he didn't want to give up on it because he didn't want to disappoint his dad, which is like, that it breaks my heart, and I really feel for the kid, and I feel for the parents, and I think that that's where librarians can bridge that gap and support, because like a girl in 6th grade, she's not my student, came in last week, and she's like, my mom wants me to read Gone with the Wind. And I was like, oh, why does she want you to read that? But I didn't say that. I was like, well, okay, so what do we need to do to get you there? And so then you like create a ladder of complexity. And so building context, scaling up her understanding so that she might not get to Gone with the Wind this year, but she might next year, but she'll be reading around it, and she'll be able to have conversations with her mom, and then she'll understand why her mom loves that book so much. Okay, so if we say that all of this complicated stuff is making it really hard to grow readers in the secondary in ways that are much harder than in the primary school, then what do? In education, we assess and we intervene, right? And there's this adage, right? If you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And I do believe in this to a lot to a great degree, except for it's tricky with reading, because so much of what we want to grow in reading are things that can't be measured by tests, right? So like a sense of beauty, motivation, creativity, critical thinking, empathy, compassion, self-awareness, enthusiasm, like courage, civic-mindedness, these things come from books, but it's hard to measure them. I get so excited when I talk about reading. All right, breathe. Okay, so this is the science of reading. This is the literacy parade. This is such a complicated diagram, and reading is so complicated. This is why reading is hard to assess, because it's so many things, and it's a miracle we can read. Like, I'm so grateful to be an English teacher because I feel like I get to see this happening in front of me. And I don't know how to do this. I don't teach them how to read, so primary teachers are amazing. Okay, but when we look at assessment, these are the things we have to think about. How well do they capture students' growth as a reader? How do we take into account the potential disconnect between assessment results and actual reading ability and engagement? What are the limitations of quantitative assessments in fostering a love of reading? Because assessments don't measure engagement. I'm going to talk about the different kinds of assessments and what they're good for and what they're not good for, and how I see them in best practice and how I see poor practice, okay? So, like when I was in school, I took the SAT. You took the SAT in grade 2, grade 6, grade 10, and then you do the one that's like the SAT that gets you into university. My students in Singapore, for a long time, they were doing the Edinburgh reading test. As an American, I took the Edinburgh reading test that my grade 6s were taking, and I didn't pass it because I have such a different schema, such a different vocabulary than what was expected. So then I decided that's not a valid assessment if I didn't do very well. There's the MAP test. A lot of schools measure with the MAP test. There's the International Schools Assessment. A lot of schools use the ISA. Right now, our school uses the ISA exam. As a parent, how many of you are parents? I should ask at the beginning. Okay. So as a parent, this is what you should think of assessments. It is a bird's eye view of progress. So it's weird because it's a bird's eye view, but then it's also a snapshot of one day. And maybe your kid had a bad day. Maybe they had an argument with their best friend. Maybe they didn't have lunch. Maybe they were late to their club activity, and they sat down for their test, and they couldn't focus very well. And then you're basing a lot of things on that number. So a lot of parents overestimate what that skill means, what that score means. So like I've had parents come to parent-teacher conferences and be like, he's not a reader, but he was good at math. And it's like, well, what are you basing that judgment on, right? So I think that's problematic. For teachers, it's actually, especially the ISA and the MAP, it's a view of how the school's curriculum is doing to suit the needs of the students so that we measure up against other schools. We see metrics across the board. You can use it as one piece in a diagnostic puzzle. So if a student does like worse and worse 2 consecutive years, then you might want to look at other tools, like go and see maybe there's something going on that you can help that student as a learner. Perhaps they do need some literacy intervention or some numeracy intervention, but it's one piece in a diagnostic puzzle. Sometimes schools use it as a diagnostic tool. It should not be. The other thing that teachers do, and I've seen this happen a lot, is limiting students to their reading level based on a standardized test. Forgetting that schema theory of reading. So let's say your passage is about horses and you've never seen a horse, ridden a horse, been around a horse. You don't have that schema. You're not going to be able to think very well about it, and answer those passage-based questions will be harder. If you are crazy about dinosaurs and you've been reading about dinosaurs since you were in 5th grade, or since you're 5 years old, and now you're in 8th grade, you can answer the questions without even reading the passage, perhaps, right? So that's the idea of building schema and how it makes assessing reading really hard. So for librarians, this is something that's interesting. You can go to your admin office and you can get the scores and you can guide collection development. So you know that you have a reading that you have some material that's at different reading levels that match. Like I know that when I took my job, our collection was very much skewed to books that were too hard for the students. And so I've been working hard to create more equal access to reading at different levels. But also, I've seen librarians limit students to their reading level. There's even, like, when they come and check out a book, I've seen librarians say, like, what, like, band you are, like JKL or LK, from the Fontes Pinnell. That's like, who wants to be labeled like that, right? Okay, so summative assessments. Now, when I was growing up, and I was talking to I think Katie at breakfast, that box, that accelerated reading program where there was those folders, if you were a nerdy kid, that really mattered because you read that pamphlet and you answered those quizzes and you were like, next level, please, right? And you zoomed through that box. And also it's still the best color. It looks orange there, but it was gold, right? And being that orangey brown color, like to pull that out of the box and walk to your seat. But what about the kids that didn't get there? What about kids who English isn't their first language? So I think there's a couple of things, especially with summative assessments that are like end of unit reading exams or an essay. Essays are complicated because if you're trying to measure reading skill, but when you're reading an essay, you're measuring writing skill because how can you not, right? It's really hard to break those up. And the other thing is when you do a book report or a diorama or a project, you're pulling the kid out of the book. And so then they're engaged in this project. It's like what Nadine was talking about, the Grecian urn. So then I remember making a diorama of the Babysitter Club books in grade 4. That was the biggest waste of time. Okay, the other thing that I see parents doing is they do the work with them or like really, really over prep them. And then it's raising the stakes on something and it's making kids think they can't do it on their own. And actually school is where we're supposed to mess up. Like you're supposed to it's your chance to screw up and do better. There's this whole thing about failing well, and we're in school to learn. And so it's not to your students' best interest if you help them with their book report, because they can do it on their own. Okay, so what I was talking about with teachers is the best practice with the summative assessment is hard. To carefully design an assessment that measures transferable reading skills, because you want reading skills that transfer. You also want to be able to see textual knowledge that's right there and conceptual understanding. It's really, really hard work for teachers. And so what ends up happening sometimes is we give busy work, we conflate skills, like assessing writing instead of reading. It's really hard to be a good writer, and writing skills lag behind reading skills for a long time. It's like a spiral staircase, and also the harder that they're reading something, then the harder it is for them to write about it, so then they slide backwards down that spiral staircase. And it pulls kids out of the books. And I think for librarians, the best thing you can do is you can support teachers in choosing age-appropriate and relevant books, so that if they are doing big summative assessments, that those books are really good books that are rich enough where teachers can create good assessments. And I think malpractice, and this is really hard because teachers have librarians have such librarian hearts, and you're a service-oriented person, and it's hard to speak up when you're in a support role, but sometimes you have to speak up if you see something that's where kids are only in middle school for 3 years. It's 3 years to grow as a reader, and you probably need, as a librarian, you should speak up if you're noticing too much busy work and too many reading activities instead of deep reading. Okay, so this is the sweet spot. And this is what's really strange, is formative and informal assessment is what grows readers, but as a parent, it looks small and it looks messy, and it's harder to, there's no way of really putting a number to formative and informal assessment. And so the only thing I've seen parents really mess up is they sometimes help kids game the system and cheat on their reading log. Please, please, please don't do that. I'm sure none of you, those of you who raised your hands, you are not those kinds of parents because you're here. But okay, so I'm going to basically show you in the next few slides. It's embarrassing. It's like opening up my refrigerator and showing you the inside of my refrigerator. But I'm going to show you a few of the formative assessment tools that I use. And I think it's really important to help kids understand the why, because middle school kids are smart, and when they understand the why of things, then they'll be more reflective, and they'll understand, they'll be able to name and notice when they're learning. Okay, so this is one of my students' reading logs. Now, people always say that teachers hate reading logs, students hate reading logs. I love reading logs because this is a student who logged her reading grade 6, grade 7, grade 8. She is not a straight A student. She is a very, I'm not going to give a grade to this student, but she's not like a high flyer. Like, she's a standard, normal kid, and she did not consider herself a reader. But look at all that she read. I didn't teach her in grade 6. This is a good teacher. I taught her in grade 8. But notice what she's doing. She's talking about when she abandoned a book, when she finished the book, how many pages, what genre it was. She's tracking. This is why it's important. Because this doesn't matter. What matters is the thinking afterwards. So what I do with my students is you have them look at their reading log, and then you say, imagine this is an artifact. What are you noticing about this reader? What are the patterns you see? And then you have them name and notice patterns. What is this student's favorite genre? Does this student read quickly, slowly? What kinds of books does this student abandon? What kinds of books does the student like? And then you say, what are the next steps for this reader? Right? And then it takes them out, and it helps them think critically about themselves as readers. You can have them do it with each other. But if you look along the bottom, so she tracked in 6, 7, 8. I'm going to show you this, which I think is really powerful. I know lots of you are doing this, but these are her next books. How did you learn about this book? BorrowBox recommendation, that's an online platform. Book Pass, we do that in class where we pass books. Ms. Erickson recommendation. Look at that. I'm famous to this kid. And I even trended more than TikTok. She wanted to read It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover from TikTok, but I gave her so many other better recommendations. So, because this is what's great about being a teacher, is you have this relationship with kids where the librarian doesn't always get that chance. I wish that as a librarian I had this close of relationships with students, but I don't. But what I can do as a librarian is I can make boxes of books and take them to teachers and say, this is for kids who, or tell me about kids in your class who are struggling with, or what are you studying, and I physically take boxes of books to their classrooms. These are her reading goals. These tell you a lot. Reading goals are amazing. So we set these WOOP goals, so Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan. It's from a TED Talk. It's really good. I'll send you the TED Talk if you want it. It's really interesting. But you can see her wish was to read every day for 20 to 30 minutes. Her outcome, this is very interesting, to help my writing become more descriptive. So she already is connecting reading and writing together, which is really, really good. And her obstacles, distractions, phone, texting, etc. She's being completely honest. Her plan, I will make sure to sit and read for 30 minutes and put my distractions away from me. That's a promise that she made with me. And then I follow up with her, and I'm going to show you how I follow up with my students. Her later goal, read more often, stronger habits, distractions. It's always distractions, and it's always phones. But I love this one. Her plan is to not let 2 days go by without reading by using my planner. Because I taught them this silly trick that I learned from Jerry Seinfeld about writing jokes. And so he had this, when he was starting out as a comedian and he wanted to write more material and he just couldn't get himself to do it, he would put an X every day that he wrote material, and he wouldn't let 2 days go by without writing something. And look how, he's pretty successful. It worked for him. It might work for her, right? Okay. I want to show you also, this is how I follow up with my students. So this is live from last year, my grade 9 students, their names, and then every time I see them, when I shout out attendance, I ask them, what book are they reading, what page are they on? And it just becomes our routine. And at first that seems really confronting, and some of my colleagues are oh, that's shaming, but it's just how you leverage it, because I celebrate the heck out of it. Like when I see a student read 50 pages between Tuesday and Thursday, I'm like, you look smarter to me, right? Like I'm always like trying to like big up their reading. And then when they finish a book, I'm like, you get to skip the queue. We're gonna conference about that book right now. And then like when kids like get stuck, I'm trying to think of an example. I often got stuck with his reading right there, and I also put, like it's private, no one sees this, you guys get to see it and I see it, that's it, my cover teacher sees it. So I put private notes about like when I email parents and when I follow up on things, when I need a conference. But when a kid gets stuck, then I'll say, what strategies do we have when you get stuck in a book? Like what do you do? Do you skim 3 pages? Do you skip ahead a chapter? Do you go back and catch up where you were? Like what works for you guys? And then they help each other out, so it's not just coming from me. And then lovely things would happen where students would start recommending books to each other during that brief. It takes 10 minutes. It doesn't take long. It's so worth it. Like I had one student, I loved it, Elsa, when someone was starting a book and she said, oh, I wish I had never read that book because then I could read it for the first time. And then everyone, that book was so popular, I couldn't keep it on the shelf. So it's like, and it's coming from kids, it's not coming from me, and that's building reading community. And I keep track of everything there. I'm going to show you also this, which is, it's my running record, because I know that primary teachers keep a running record of conferences, but I do this in high school, and these are like the conferences, not making progress. We need to have 1 book at home, 1 book at school for him, and that works. I just checked out two books in my name. He took 1 to his dad's house, 1 to his mom's house, and I had 1 at my desk. Like that's a huge expense for 1 kid, but it was worth it for me because he needed the reading, and he was obviously having a hard time sorting his life out. Reading really challenging nonfiction about cancer. His mom had cancer at that time, and he was reading a book that was way too hard for him. And he was reading it in his second language, and he didn't want to quit that book, and I suffered through that cancer book with him because it mattered, right? He had to stop and do contextual research a lot. Couldn't really point out any anecdotal stories like in the text. So I take close notes. Like with Melody, I talked about horror and the hero's journey. Like, do we ever see the hero's journey in horror? Like she's, sent her off to do some reading, come back, report back to me. Okay. So, this is what librarians can do, support teachers with this process. If you know teachers who are doing this, like you take the support role. Support parents and students in choosing age-appropriate and relevant texts. Like I really try to reach out to parents having like a YA middle grade book. Like this year, the Library Leadership Council, they're students, but they're putting together a book club for parents. So parents are reading YA books, which is lovely. Just creating as many community experiences to build reading, social reading opportunities. I mean, what's at risk for librarians is not getting involved. Okay, here are some more like snapshot things that I would do with my readers. And these are things that if you're a library teacher, you could do like term reflections, copy and paste a link to your reading log, study your reading log as an artifact. What was the best book you read? Share how you've seen yourself grow as a reader. Like that's fast and easy. That gives me so much information. When they are stuck writing goals, I have them like, they love to help a friend, right? So it's like, I give them scenarios. So Jasper maintained their reading habit over the summer and managed to finish all the books they borrowed from the library. What should their WOOP goal be? Like what should Jasper do? Right? What are the next steps? So helping someone else helps you help yourself, especially in middle school because so much is social. In high school, so much is social. Okay, and then exit tickets are really great. This is an example of a student who was like trying to punch above their card with reading a classic. So he was reading Catcher in the Rye. A theme I see is that my character really loves calling his people over to have a drink that he barely knows just because he feels so lonely. Like he kind of gets it, pretty much doesn't get it. He's decoding it. He doesn't have the schema, doesn't understand like teenage angst. I asked him what like Holden should do. He thinks that Holden should apologize to his parents and get a tutor. So like he's going from his schema, which I love. I think it's so awesome, but he needed to read something else. This is another like shocker. This is a student who is reading To Kill a Mockingbird, was on page 262. The world isn't always kind to the people who help it, which is like, that's a lovely idea. I see this throughout the book. When the trial began for Tom Robinson, the victim lied about the fact that she was raped and beaten by a black man when she was beaten by her father. The jury only consists of white men. No women are on the jury because women aren't smart enough back then. That's kind of a train crash. Tom Robinson was shot 17 times because he was escaping, but if a white man was escaping, he would only be shot once. Like, this is a lot of stuff to unpack with this student. This student is not ready for this book. However, the student can decode, and the student maybe could even do okay on an ISA exam, like passage-based reading, can find evidence, but like is not getting it, would be better served reading something like Chains, would be better reading like Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, like building up some context about like slavery and post-slavery racism. Here's another good one. This is my favorite thing. I ask students to put, I share just an empty slide deck and I say put a cover of the book and what you're reading and why it matters. Okay, so she was reading Anna and the French Kiss, and then she gives me, she's not telling me why it matters. She's giving me a really lame summary. It's not even a good summary. So then I know I need to talk to this student and talk about like, what is she getting out of this book? Why did she choose this book? And then talk about like the character arc. Like you start unpacking things and helping them think about their reading. But these ones are so lovely. So here, I love how she's using the word empathize. She's saying the book empathizes people because the book is about embracing who you are and how you shouldn't be embarrassed of your culture. That's why it matters. That's pretty good. This one, readers can see how the girl tries to hold on to her Koreanness. That's beautiful. This is where thesis statements come from. This is like where claims, this is where academic discourse starts. If you can start it from this point where it matters. I love this one. The author has really described how the boys felt so that readers can understand their struggles. That's beautiful, and it's one sentence, and it takes no time, but I know how students are able to like connect to their reading and if they're getting meaning. Okay, so guideposts. These are the things when I coach teachers to look for 15 minutes. Yes, that's going to be fine. Volume, stamina, fluency, complexity. Okay, so when we talk about volume, and I know this is like old news, but I think it's important to talk about. Okay, so the questions I ask when I look at volume. How much do you read? Page number. This is where librarians can do reading challenges. This is where earlier today, Adam was talking about series, and someone asked a great question about why series works for kids and not for adults. That was a great question. Series, it takes a lot of work to be to build world. Like world building is hard, and so once a student lives in that world, they don't want to leave that world, right? So series builds readers. I hate reading series. I'm not a good series reader, but I read series for my students. But also series build automaticity. It helps they get comfortable making meaning in a text. We talk about stamina. I compare it to like riding a bicycle or running. It's how long you can sit with the struggle, and the more you practice, the better you get at it. So often when kids come back after a summer holiday, they can only sit for 10 minutes, and then you can see their heads bob around, and then by the end of the term, they're like in their books for fully 20 minutes. That's stamina. I was at a party in Singapore last month, and I met someone whose job it is to, her job is to, in Singapore, make Netflix ads that are less than 30 seconds, because that's how long people are willing to sit and watch a Netflix ad. 30 seconds. So how can we get our kids to sit and read for an hour? It's pretty amazing. Also, I'm just going to tell you this because I think it's so interesting. So people, like, I was listening to a podcast about Moby Dick and why like no one reads Moby Dick anymore. And it's because back when Moby Dick was published, no one had seen a whale. And so you had to sit through all of that world building. You had to use your imagination and like felt together what that whale would look like. But now it's like there's the Nature Channel, and you can Google it, and you can put your head on the body of a whale. Like you can do so many interesting things. So there's no reason, right? For students, it's really hard to get them to want to do that deep work of reading, and especially now if we're looking at the shortening of attention spans. I think that's our biggest struggle, is stamina more than anything else. Because without stamina, then you can't work on fluency. So with fluency, it's actually moving between genres. So having the strategies to handle more difficult language. And And also realizing that, like, if you're a good fantasy reader, if you start to read historical fiction, then you're going to have to sit with that struggle for a little while longer, and knowing that and having the strategies to work through that. And then complexity. I think complexity is so interesting because people think complexity is just like hard language or classics, right? But actually, complexity is different for different people. It's, yes, difficult language is part of it, but it's also books that are in a remote time and place from your experience. So if you study and have read a lot about, I don't know, time travel, then like a really geeky sci-fi novel is not going to be hard for you, but it could be really hard for me. Multiple plot lines, being able to hang on to multiple plot lines and multiple characters and subplots, that's complexity. The number of characters, also unusual structures, novels with complex structure, that's really, really hard. Timelines, hanging onto timelines. Also background knowledge, how much background knowledge a text requires of you. So social, political, cultural is important, but it's all worth it. Like, this is recent research about like how good reading is for your brain in the study of 30,000 participants, but especially for an aging brain, literary fiction is really good for your brain. Okay, so strategies for a teacher. Identity-based pedagogy is like the sexy word for something a long time ago is just every kid a reader, which is like getting to know the kid, like assuming every kid in your class is a reader. There's no non-readers. There's just kids who haven't found the right book. And so asking them, like, what are your hobbies? What do you do for fun? If you had a whole day to yourself, what would you do with it? And not expecting it to be about reading, but being able to match their interests to books. Self-directed schema building. So with my older students, I wouldn't do this to grade 6s, but to older kids, I always say, if they say a book is boring, I always say there's no boring books, there's only boring readers, because you haven't built the schema to make it interesting to you. Like, that's an inside job. You have to expand your boundaries. So I do this thing called reading territories, and you make a list of all the things that you know a lot about, that you care a lot about, or you want to learn about, and that's where we start with your reading. And this grows over time. And can you imagine, like, people who are really interesting, for the most part, just have immense schema. And they know so much, and they just hook all of their new learning into it. Supported goal setting. Like, kids, they can't set goals in isolation. They need support with that. Talking. So everything about reading, we think it's solitary and that it's just within the four corners of a text, but kids need lots of time to talk and process. And so giving kids that time is important. That's the precursor to academic discourse. Like, academics, they write to each other, but kids write in the air, and that's talking. And they need to talk to teachers, they need to talk to parents, they need to talk to each other about the books that they're reading. Tracking, making personalized recommendations, conferencing, and then building a reading community. For librarians, curating diverse and engaging collections, hosting events and programs that make reading social and enjoyable, where kids can talk about books. I see that here everywhere. Running middle grade and YA book clubs, keeping teachers informed as to what's age appropriate. Teachers are so busy, they don't have time to read widely. It's the luxury of librarians. So I don't think we have time to read widely, but we read a lot of reviews, and then we can pursue our reading a bit more than teachers have time to. So I feel like that's a big part of our role. Something that Katie and Nadine do is they build core collections. And I've started doing that too, where it's like at grade levels, like what are the 25 books that most kids should be reading, and I think that gives some guidance. Taking every opportunity to talk to readers about what they're reading. So, like when I walk across like when I'm standing in line at the canteen, it's so geeky, but I ask even big rugby players, I'm like, what are you reading? How's it going? I'm always asking people what they're reading. I'm assuming people are reading, and even if they're lying to me, the next time they see me, they have a book in mind to talk about, which I think is wonderful. And then when I see a kid on campus with a book, I make a big deal about it. I'm like, what is that? Oh my gosh, would you recommend that to me? What kind of a reader would love that book? And so now kids just come up to me and talk about books, which is great. For parents, I think this is really important. Like a basket for the phones, or some parents I've seen a cell hotel, which is like IKEA shoe bag thing, and you just put your cell in the hotel. Sharing your reading identity with your kids, even if you don't have a lot of time to read. I had one student who she was struggling reading, and her dad would just read parts of the newspaper that he was reading out loud and talk about why he thought that was important, or like pull out big ideas, and she grew as a reader. I think it was just the attention and care and his commitment to her as a reader that she was so receptive then to taking on my feedback. Reading should be a leisure activity, not just a school requirement. I think that's super, super important. There's all that research about text-rich environments, and kids even who grow up with books, like have books around them, are better readers. Take your kids to the library and get to know the librarian, because librarians are like the sweetest thing. Like when it comes to helping kids read, like they're there for that singular purpose. Okay, so I love to end with this slide, because this kid did so poorly on the ISA test. This kid, their mom wanted to take them out of our school and put them back in the German European school, and this is amazing. So, was reading Harry Potter and says, Harry doesn't understand the ways of the wizarding world, and the series is all about how Harry adapts to the wizarding world, learning about his history and discovers how he can defeat Voldemort. It makes me think of how hard and awkward it is to go away from the places I always call home, and the people and culture I lived with and am used to. It makes me think about how hard I found it at first to learn English, and now how hard it is to learn a new language. This makes me cry because I think it's so beautiful, such as Chinese, and I think it's amazing how humans can adapt and change quickly, as Harry did in Harry Potter, and a huge number of people are doing today, which is so beautiful that a kid got that from a book about a wizard who lives under a stairwell. So, I think reading really matters, and thank you for listening. Oh, I think we have time for questions.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how, as parents, we could play a role in building a broad schema, as you explained, like what you care about, want to learn about?
How parents can do that?
Yeah, can parents play a role there? Because not all schools, frankly,
Yes.
in India build that, in the school. So.
Yeah. So I think you know your students really well, and so you know your children really well. But then also I think sometimes, I'm coming from grade 6 to 12, where kids want more autonomy and they want more space from their parents. And so instead of their parents like giving them too much guidance, I think just asking them like what they might be interested. I mean, I'm trying to think what I would do. I don't have kids, but with my middle school students, the ones whose parents that want to be more involved, I know it's hard, like, because you want to give them space, but then you want to protect them and you want to make sure their reading is growing. But do you have open conversations about what they're reading? And do they know what you are reading?
I don't talk about what I'm reading, but they can see what I'm reading.
So I think the best thing you can do is talk about how you find the books you read.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting.
Because that's something where kids, if they, they'll pick everything up from TikTok, and if they're not on TikTok, then it's from their friends. And so knowing other ways of finding books to read, I think that's a way of growing schema. I think if you watch a film or you watch TV, ask them what was the deeper meaning, like what was important about that, and then how did the creator create that meaning? I think that just having those, because actually talking about film can be a lot like talking about literature. I think that's useful.
Thank you.
Hi, Angela. I loved your talk.
Thank you.
And I feel you as a fellow librarian. I felt everything that you said and the passion that you came through with.
Thank you.
My question to you is, I'm running a startup that works with powering preschool libraries, especially in the tier 1 and tier 2 cities in India. My question to you is, this is a very different subset here, but the parents I'm working with, they are not so engaged and willing to spend time on reading per se with children. In a scenario like that, how do we make a difference?
Yes.
So,
and are the parents literate?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
But they don't see reading as an important part of development for
Yeah.
children. It's more academic or sports and art and all of that works, but
Yeah.
reading is not taken seriously for parents.
And do you have the opportunity to do like parent workshops?
We do. But
Yes?
most of the time, parents are not even
They don't
attending
come.
these workshops.
Other librarians, what ideas do you have? Compulsory. Get your admin to make it compulsory. That's a good idea. Yeah. I think you need to get admin on board. I know we plan parent education workshops. I co-plan one with the primary librarian, and like 160 parents signed up, and then 40 turned up. We ordered food for 160 people. Like, it was terrible. But parents get busy, and I think they have like aspirations of wanting to attend, and then when it comes down to it, they're on their phones. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's hard, yes, but maybe maybe part of orientation. See if you can squish it into another meeting. That's one thing, like starting out with a book talk or starting out with like 5 minutes of literacy before other meetings that like try and push your way in. Yes.
Hi, Angela. I mean, that was a really nice session. I mean, it gives a really a different perspective of a librarian which I had in my mind, and you are doing so much. And just one question: my kid is 5.5 years old, and we also have a good amount of books. So just wanted to know, because I don't have any strategy in my mind, how to encourage his love for the books. Currently, he is loving the books the most. I mean, he keeps few books for mother to read, few books for me to read. So if you can give me some guidance, like what kind of categories I can expose him to, or how can I build it up more?
It sounds like you're doing a good job already. Sounds amazing. No, I think like especially with that young of kids, just like creating all of the opportunities to read and giving free choice. But it's great that that your child's already has created a reading life for themselves, right? And separating books that he wants you to read. And I'm not a primary. What do you guys think, librarians? Strategies for early years? Play. Yes, reading out loud. I think the one thing I can tell you is your child grows, don't stop reading out loud until the end. Read until they're 16, 18, read out loud. Hearing language is so important. Yeah, that's something that
I know you mentioned book talk and other sources for getting reading recommendations, but as a librarian, how do you deal with video or podcasts or other kinds of
Yes,
media,
yes.
which are also words,
Yes.
which are also information?
Yes.
So when are they the enemy? When are they allies? How do you integrate? Or is that a question that doesn't come up?
No, that's fantastic. Yeah. So when I do like a reading inventory, I ask students like where else do they get language? So what podcasts do they listen to? What television shows do they but mostly students, at least my students, don't listen to podcasts. I push podcasts out to parents to listen to and to encourage with their students. Kids watch a lot of YouTube. And YouTube is dangerous because of that algorithm, and you can just get sucked. I mean, I get sucked into YouTube, so if I do, then kids for sure do. And so, but just being aware, and then I help. Well, high school, I curate for like IB. I curate podcasts and YouTube channels that I think are educational. So I think
So that does become a part of your core collection.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah. Hi, Angela. In my case, my kid is reading every day. He reads minimum 200 pages a day, 3 to 4
Wow.
books a week, kind of it. He's been reading for last 8, 9 years. He's right now in grade 6. I just want to know as a parent, what next he can go on.
Wow. So he's prolific reader.
He's reading, he enjoys a lot, but is there anything next is available where we can explore? What would be your suggestions for
Does-
taking it forward?
So he's reading 200 pages a day?
Minimum.
Wow.
That's something.
And so is reading across genre?
So, not across genres. Let's say for last 2 weeks he's reading Autumn is Foul, and there are sometimes he's reading Harry Potter, Sydney Sullivan, and he connects with watching movies of the same in Netflix or other things. But what would be the next way? He enjoys it a lot. Like
Yeah.
anything else, he finds it very comfortable taking it.
No, I think it's wonderful. Just keep that up.
Yeah,
I think-
definitely we'll be keeping it. But what could
Yeah.
be as a parent, we can take it to next levels.
So if it sounds like he likes reading fantasy, so then like a ladder of complexity, like what next fantasy
Yeah.
books that are more challenging, hanging on to more story structures, more complex vocabulary, or moving, so you can move up or you can move over. Like fantasy is a lot of world building, but so is historical fiction is a lot of world building. So reading historical fiction would
Okay.
be another direction, and that
Okay.
often goes down and then up. Yeah, that's what I think is moving across genre or moving up in complexity.
Okay, moving into other genres, as
Mm-hmm.
well as going on depth, you are saying. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. But 200 pages a day, that's amazing.
Oh, that's very minimal. I would say
Yeah.
our job nowadays is trying to snatch a book out of him, kind of feeling.
Yeah, and I think that's also balance is important. I did have one student whose mom sent me a text saying that she was putting her Kindle in a plastic bag and taking it to the shower, and I was like, oh, like I've overdone.
No, they love it a lot. They live with the books. They start their day with the books. They end their days with the book in the buses or whenever a free period or
Yeah.
something. So that's why we feel like, okay, what next? They can take it forward.
I think it's really, I would keep going with all that volume because when academic course load adds, then
Yes.
the reading volume is going to go down, but all of that schema that's being built will
Yes.
stay.
Okay,
And
okay.
so, yeah, stick with it. But up in complexity or over to
Yeah.
another genre.
And also they're coming up with some responses like, I don't find these series good because finally the hero is killed. Hero has to sacrifice his life
Yeah.
for to make the point. So
Yeah.
they're coming up with their own conclusions also. But yeah, other genres, yeah, definitely we will explore. Yeah. Thanks, Angela.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.